The Galactic Council's chamber buzzed with tension. Holograms of planetary leaders flickered in and out of focus, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of concern and confusion. Earth's representative, Dr. Elena Marcus, stood at the edge of the gathering, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the panic surrounding her. She watched the debate unfold, her mind already several steps ahead, calculating, preparing. The enemy is ancient, relentless. Earth will fall without immediate assistance. A voice boomed from one of the holograms, a reptilian figure with scales glistening in the artificial light. His eyes darted around the room, searching for agreement, finding only hesitation. Dr. Marcus finally stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise with quiet authority. "We have a plan," she said, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her, curious, skeptical. "Earth has prepared for this day. We will not fall." General Darius Kane, a grizzled veteran of countless battles, stood beside her, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "Tell them, Marcus," he muttered, his gravelly voice carrying only to her ears. "It's time." Dr. Marcus nodded, taking a deep breath before addressing the council. "We have revived the Spartans." A ripple of disbelief passed through the room. "The Spartans?" someone scoffed. "Ancient warriors from Earth's past? What good are they against an enemy armed with technology beyond our comprehension? These aren't just any warriors." Dr. Marcus continued, unperturbed by the skepticism. "We've combined advanced AI with genetic engineering. These Spartans are the best of our history, infused with the strategic genius of Leonidas himself." The council members exchanged glances, uncertainty etched on their faces. But before they could voice further doubts, a sudden alarm blared through the chamber. A technician appeared on one of the side screens, his face pale with fear. "They've breached Earth's defense grid. The attack has begun." The council erupted into chaos, voices shouting over each other as panic set in. But Dr. Marcus and General Kane remained composed. "It's time to show them what we're made of," Kane said, his voice steady. He turned to Dr. Marcus, his eyes hard but resolute. "Deploy the Spartans." Dr. Marcus nodded and activated a communication link to the command center on Earth. "Initiate Operation Leonidas," she ordered, her voice steady despite the storm brewing around her. "Deploy the Spartans immediately." The command center, buried deep within Earth's crust, responded with cold efficiency. A series of doors slid open, revealing rows of pods, each housing a single Spartan. They were giants of men, their muscles rippling under the dim lights, faces hidden behind gleaming helmets. As the pods hissed open, the Spartans stepped forward in unison, their movements precise, controlled. The leader of the Spartans, Leonidas 2.0, emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding, almost palpable. He surveyed his surroundings with a calm, calculating gaze, his mind already processing the battlefield before him. He was not just a warrior, he was a weapon of war, crafted from the essence of a legend. "Earth is under attack." Dr. Marcus's voice crackled through the Spartans' earpieces. "You know what to do." Leonidas 2.0 responded with a single word, his voice cold and resolute. "Understood." The Spartans moved out, their footsteps echoing through the metal corridors as they made their way to the surface. Outside, the sky was ablaze with the enemy's assault, energy beams cutting through the atmosphere, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. But the Spartans were unfazed. They had been trained for this, built for this. As they reached the surface, the first wave of the enemy descended upon them, a swarm of drones and mechanized soldiers armed with weapons far more advanced than anything Earth had ever seen. But the Spartans were ready. They moved with a fluidity and precision that belied their size, cutting through the enemy ranks with brutal efficiency. Their ancient swords clashed with futuristic armor, their shields deflecting energy blasts with ease. Leonidas 2.0 led the charge, his mind a whirlwind of tactics and strategies, every move calculated, every strike deadly. He knew the enemy would not fall easily, but he also knew that victory was possible. The enemy had underestimated them, and that would be their downfall. As the battle raged on, the tension in the Galactic Council chamber reached its peak. The council members watched in stunned silence as the Spartans held their ground, repelling wave after wave of enemy forces. The disbelief that had greeted Dr. Marcus's announcement began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of awe. "Perhaps Earth is not as defenseless as we thought," one of the council members murmured, her voice tinged with newfound respect. Dr. Marcus allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. "This is just the beginning," she said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. "We will not fall." The battlefield was a wasteland of shattered metal and scorched earth. Smoke hung heavy in the air, twisting in the wind like spectral fingers reaching toward the sky. Amidst the devastation, the Spartans stood tall, their armor stained with the blood of their enemies, yet their resolve unbroken. The first wave had been repelled, but the true test was yet to come. General Darius Kane watched the unfolding carnage from the command center, his eyes narrowing as he studied the tactical display. "They're regrouping," he muttered, a note of concern creeping into his voice. "Marcus, what's the status on the Spartans? How are they holding up?" Dr. Elena Marcus, seated at a console nearby, quickly scanned the data streaming across her screen. "They're performing at peak efficiency," she replied, though the tension in her voice was unmistakable. "But the enemy is adapting. We need to stay ahead of them, or this will turn into a war of attrition that we can't afford." Kane nodded, his mind already racing through possible strategies. "We need to disrupt their coordination," he said, thinking aloud. "If we can cut off their command structure, we might have a chance to turn this around." At that moment, a transmission crackled through the comms, interrupting their thoughts. "General Kane, this is Leonidas 2.0. The Spartan leader's voice came through, steady and commanding. "We've identified the enemy's command unit. Requesting permission to engage." Kane hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "Permission granted. Take them down, but be cautious. We can't afford to lose you." "Understood," Leonidas 2.0 replied, the connection cutting out as abruptly as it had begun. On the battlefield, Leonidas 2.0 signaled to his fellow Spartans, his eyes fixed on the enemy's command post in the distance. The structure, heavily fortified and bristling with weapons, was the nerve center of the enemy's operations. Taking it out would be no small feat, but the Spartans were anything but ordinary soldiers. "Spartans," Leonidas 2.0 called out, his voice carrying across the battlefield with the weight of ancient authority. "We strike at the heart. Follow my lead." Without hesitation, the Spartans formed up behind him, their movements synchronized and precise. They advanced under the cover of smoke and debris, using the chaos of the battlefield to mask their approach. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. As they closed in on the command post, the enemy's defenses came to life. Automated turrets swiveled into position, unleashing a torrent of firepower that would have decimated lesser warriors. But the Spartans moved with a grace and speed that defied their size, dodging and deflecting the incoming fire with their shields and countering with deadly accuracy. Leonidas 2.0 led the charge, his sword slicing through enemy armor with ease. His mind was a whirlwind of strategies, each one honed to perfection by the memories of the ancient king whose name he bore. He could feel the weight of history on his shoulders, the legacy of a people who had faced impossible odds and triumphed. Failure was not an option. Behind him, the other Spartans fought with equal ferocity, their unity and discipline a testament to their training and the bond they shared. They were more than just warriors. They were brothers, forged in the crucible of war and bound by a common purpose. The tension on the battlefield was palpable, the air crackling with energy as the Spartans pressed their assault. The enemy, caught off guard by the sheer audacity of the attack, struggled to regroup, their once cohesive formation unraveling under the relentless pressure. Inside the command post, the enemy leader watched in disbelief as the Spartans closed in. His confidence, once unshakable, now wavered in the face of these relentless foes. Desperation clawed at his mind as he issued frantic orders, trying to stem the tide, but it was too late. Leonidas 2.0 breached the command post's outer defenses with a single, powerful strike, the force of the blows sending shockwaves through the structure. He and his Spartans stormed the interior, cutting down any who dared stand in their way. The enemy leader, cornered and outmatched, made a final, desperate attempt to fight back, but he was no match for the Spartan leader. As Leonidas 2.0's sword pierced the enemy leader's chest, the battle outside began to shift. The enemy forces, now leaderless and in disarray, faltered, their coordination shattered. The tide of battle turned in favor of the Spartans, the once overwhelming odds now tilting in their favor. General Kane and Dr. Marcus watched the events unfold on their screens, a palpable sense of relief washing over them. "They did it," Kane said, a rare smile breaking through his stern exterior. "They actually did it." But even as victory seemed within reach, Dr. Marcus couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. "This isn't over yet," she murmured, her gaze fixed on the tactical display. "The enemy won't give up that easily." The battlefield had grown eerily silent in the aftermath of the Spartans' assault. The enemy's command post, once a hub of activity, now lay in ruins, its occupants defeated. But the victory was bittersweet. The enemy's forces were still vast, their resources seemingly endless. The Spartans had won a battle, but the war was far from over. General Kane paced in the command center, his boots clanging against the metal floor. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, some critical piece of the enemy's strategy that had yet to reveal itself. "Marcus," he called over to Dr. Elena Marcus, who was intently studying the tactical displays. "What's the status of the enemy fleet? Are they retreating?" Dr. Marcus's fingers flew over the console as she pulled up the latest scans. Her brow furrowed as she examined the data. "No," she said slowly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "They're not retreating. In fact, they're regrouping, and fast. They've just activated a secondary command unit, and it's mobilizing their forces with alarming efficiency." Kane's jaw tightened. "So, they had a backup plan all along. We should have expected that." He turned to face her, his expression grim. "What's the likelihood they'll launch a full-scale counteroffensive?" "Hi," Dr. Marcus replied, her tone leaving no room for doubt. "They're consolidating their forces for a concentrated strike. If they succeed, it could cripple our defenses." A heavy silence settled over the command center as the gravity of the situation sank in. The Spartans had given them a temporary reprieve, but it was clear the enemy was far from defeated. "Then we need to hit them before they hit us," Kane said, breaking the silence. "We can't wait for them to bring the fight to us. We have to strike now, while they're still reorganizing." Dr. Marcus nodded, her mind already working through the logistics. "Agreed. I'll coordinate with the Spartans, but we'll need to be strategic about this. A frontal assault could play right into their hands." Kane's eyes narrowed as he considered the options. "We'll have to outthink them. Use their own tactics against them. If they're relying on technology to coordinate their forces, we need to disrupt that, blind them, if we can." "An EMP strike," Marcus suggested, her voice gaining momentum. "It could knock out their communications and give us the opening we need." Kane allowed himself a small smile. "Exactly. And while they're scrambling to recover, we hit them with everything we've got." The plan was set into motion with the precision and speed that had become a hallmark of Earth's defense efforts. The Spartans were briefed on the new mission, their expressions hidden behind their helmets, but their readiness evident in the way they stood, tall, unyielding, and resolute. As the Spartans prepared to deploy, Leonidas 2.0 received a direct transmission from Dr. Marcus. "Leonidas," she said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of urgency. "This strike is critical. We're counting on you to lead the charge and buy us the time we need to launch the EMP." "Understood, Dr. Marcus," Leonidas 2.0 responded, his tone betraying no hint of doubt. "We will not fail." The Spartans moved out, their every step purposeful as they made their way to the drop point. The sky was darkening, heavy clouds rolling in, as if reflecting the storm brewing in the hearts of those who fought for Earth's survival. The enemy's forces were vast, a seemingly endless sea of drones, mechs, and soldiers. But the Spartans had faced such odds before, and they had emerged victorious. This time would be no different. Leonidas 2.0 led his team through the chaos, his mind a flurry of calculations and tactics. The enemy's secondary command unit loomed ahead, a fortress of steel and energy shields. But Leonidas had no intention of engaging it head-on. He and his Spartans would strike where the enemy least expected it. As the Spartans moved in, the sky lit up with the first volleys of enemy fire. Explosions rocked the battlefield, sending debris and shrapnel flying in all directions. But the Spartans pressed on, their movements precise and deliberate, their shields deflecting the worst of the onslaught. "Now!" Leonidas 2.0 commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. The Spartans split into smaller units, each targeting a different weak point in the enemy's defenses. The coordinated strike was swift and brutal, overwhelming the enemy's automated systems and sowing confusion in their ranks. Dr. Marcus monitored the battle from the command center, her hands clenched into fists as she watched the tactical display. The enemy's forces were faltering, their coordination slipping as the Spartans executed their plan with surgical precision. But just as victory seemed within reach, a new threat emerged. The enemy's secondary command unit activated a previously hidden weapon, a massive energy cannon, capable of devastating wide swaths of the battlefield in a single blast. "Leonidas, get out of there!" Dr. Marcus shouted into the comms, her voice laced with panic. "They've got a weapon we didn't anticipate." Before she could finish, the cannon fired, its beams slicing through the battlefield with terrifying speed. The Spartans barely had time to react, diving for cover as the blast tore through their ranks. Leonidas 2.0's unit was caught in the explosion's wake, thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. For a moment, everything went silent, the calm before the storm. As the dust settled, Leonidas 2.0 struggled to his feet, his armor scorched but intact. He looked around at his fallen brothers, anger and determination burning in his chest. The enemy had revealed their hand, and now it was time for the Spartans to strike back with everything they had. "We're not finished yet," Leonidas 2.0 growled, rallying the remaining Spartans. "For Earth! For Sparta!" The battle raged on, the stakes higher than ever, as the Spartans prepared for one final push to turn the tide in their favor. The battlefield was a smoldering wasteland, littered with the wreckage of machines and the bodies of the fallen. Dark clouds churned overhead, reflecting the despair that gripped Earth's defenders. But in the midst of this devastation, a handful of warriors remained standing, their resolve unbroken. The Spartans had been pushed to their limits, yet they refused to yield. Leonidas 2.0 surveyed the scene, his armor scorched and battered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The enemy's energy cannon had decimated their ranks, but the Spartans who remained were more determined than ever. This was their last stand, the final push to defend Earth from annihilation. General Kane's voice crackled through the comms, urgent and strained. "Leonidas, do you copy? What's your status?" "We're still in the fight, General," Leonidas 2.0 replied, his voice steady despite the odds. "But the enemy has fortified their position around the cannon. We can't get close without sustaining heavy losses." Dr. Elena Marcus cut in, her tone sharp with tension. "We need to disable that cannon, or they'll wipe us out before we can launch the EMP. There has to be a way to take it down." Leonidas 2.0 clenched his fist around his sword hilt, his mind racing. The enemy had made a critical error by focusing all their defenses on the cannon. If the Spartans could find a way to outflank them, they might just have a chance. "General," Leonidas said, his voice firm with newfound resolve, "we need a distraction. Something that will draw their attention away from the cannon long enough for us to strike." Kane's response was immediate. "Understood. I'll mobilize the remaining forces for a frontal assault. It'll be risky, but it's our best shot. You take the Spartans and hit them from the side. We'll give you the opening you need. Make it count," Dr. Marcus added, her voice softer, almost pleading. "This is our last chance." Leonidas 2.0 nodded, even though they couldn't see him. "For Earth," he said, echoing the rallying cry that had driven them from the beginning. "For Sparta." The Spartans moved swiftly, using the cover of the debris-strewn battlefield to advance toward the enemy's flank. Every step was measured, every breath controlled. The tension was palpable, the weight of the mission pressing down on them like a physical force. Meanwhile, General Kane's forces launched their assault, drawing the enemy's firepower in a spectacular display of courage and desperation. Explosions rocked the ground as the two sides clashed, the air thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone. Leonidas 2.0 led his Spartans in a wide arc, skirting the edge of the battle until they reached the enemy's flank. The enemy, focused on the frontal assault, had left this side lightly guarded. It was the opportunity they had been waiting for. "Now!" Leonidas 2.0 commanded, his voice low but intense. The Spartans surged forward, a silent storm of precision and fury. They moved like shadows, slipping through the enemy's defenses with lethal efficiency. The enemy's soldiers barely had time to react before the Spartans were upon them, swords flashing in the dim light, shields smashing through armor. The element of surprise was total, and the enemy's lines crumbled under the onslaught. Leonidas 2.0 pushed forward, his eyes locked on the cannon that loomed ahead, its massive barrel pointed menacingly at the sky. He knew they had only moments before the enemy realized what was happening and turned their defenses inward. "Take out those turrets!" he shouted to his team, signaling the Spartans to target the automated defenses that guarded the cannon. His own sword cleaved through the nearest turret, sparks flying as the machine sputtered and died. The other Spartans followed suit, dismantling the enemy's defenses with practiced precision. But just as they neared the cannon, the ground trembled beneath them, a rumbling that grew louder with each passing second. Leonidas 2.0's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. "It's powering up!" he yelled, urgency lacing his voice. "We need to disable it now!" But the cannon systems were already charging, the energy building to a catastrophic crescendo. If it fired again, there would be no survivors. "Cover me!" Leonidas 2.0 barked, breaking into a sprint toward the cannon's base. He could hear the Spartans behind him, holding off the enemy as he closed the distance. The cannon's hum grew deafening, the air crackling with energy. Leonidas 2.0 reached the base of the cannon, his mind racing as he searched for a way to disable it. There, an exposed power conduit, glowing with raw energy. Without hesitation, he plunged his sword into the conduit, the metal hilt absorbing the energy as it crackled and surged. The cannon's hum turned into a shriek, the power feedback overwhelming its systems. The ground shook as the massive weapon overloaded, sparks flying from every seam. "Fall back!" Leonidas 2.0 shouted, yanking his sword free and diving for cover. The Spartans retreated just as the cannon exploded in a blinding flash of light, the shockwave ripping through the battlefield. When the dust settled, the cannon was nothing more than a smoking ruin, its threat neutralized. The enemy forces, disoriented and leaderless, began to scatter, their will to fight shattered. Leonidas 2.0 staggered to his feet, his armor battered, his body bruised, but his spirit unbroken. The Spartans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of the battle. "General, Dr. Marcus," he said into the comms, his voice weary but triumphant. "The cannon is down. The enemy is retreating." A cheer erupted on the other end of the line, the sound of relief and victory. But Leonidas 2.0 knew the cost of this victory. He looked around at the Spartans who had fallen, their bodies lying still amidst the wreckage. "For Earth," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "For Sparta."